the speaker, particularly leader of the opposition, was right in one respect. Japan did suffer horrifically in World War II. The same way that the people of Dresden suffered horrifically when their city was bombed by the Allies in World War II. Well, that doesn't change the fact that for Germany, and indeed for Japan, recognizing that they committed atrocities, even outside of technical war, by promoting active aggression, by moving against neighbouring countries, subjugating their sovereignty, taking their territory, and injuring their ability to self-actualize and push forward their cultures, that in so doing they have done things that they should regret, not individually, but culturally, that every person in Japan should know, recognise, and accept that those were terrible things that happened, and that they, as a culture, should seek to avoid ever doing again. We think that's really important for them to move forward, both politically and culturally. That's what we're going to talk about today. So firstly, I want to deal with the two main issues in opening up: moral justifiability, and then how Japanese people will react. So I'm going to bring you two elements of extension. Firstly, I want to talk about why in North Asia in particular, the cultural period of World War II is particularly important to ensuring things like regional stability and sane nationalism. And then secondly, I'm going to talk about the sanitization of Japanese nationalism, which allows for a constructive hegemonic role in the region and benefits to Japanese people. So, moral justifiability. Because only God tried to tell them that it's unjust to impose collective responsibility where people were co-opted, right? There's some difference between the soldiers that did this and the culture. We agree totally with the government when they don't do this. In fact, Japanese culture caused people to undertake these actions and is therefore self-blame. They basically try to say that that's different from just blaming all the soldiers at once, right? Three responses. Firstly, we said that on those individual soldiers, their moral duty was to not participate in the conflict. Whatever consequences they had, right? It's totally consistent with conventional Western morals. We don't let people use self-defense, for instance, as a defense to murder. Because we recognize that there are some crimes so egregious, some actions, where individuals cannot just claim self-interest and say that they had to do it. We recognize that some acts have such high moral culpability that it is not alright to hide behind self-interest and self-defense. Secondly, we think that cultures comprise of individuals, right? So from a consequentialist point of view, we think that it's totally ineffectual to blame a nebulous culture for the crimes of the Second World War in Japan. We think that by blaming culture, what you allow individuals currently living in Japan to do is to sideline the issue, right? Say that some nebulous thing out in the ether is what caused the Japanese people to commit these horrific crimes. What's important for moving on in terms of the culture's legacy of the Second World War is for individuals to realise that people just like them made terrible decisions which negatively affected the lives of others and prevented them from having a quality of life, and that stripped them of their humanity. It's only when they have an individual level appreciation of those crimes that they're able to acknowledge them and move past them culturally. That's really important. And thirdly, we said that if it achieves useful ends, it's fine regardless, because consequentially that can help Japan move forward. We'll talk more about that in a minute. So this brings me to this issue of how Japan's going to react. Because opening up told you, basically Japanese culture continues to embrace the veneration of soldiers on a wide scale. Everyone thinks that actually the Second World War was pretty good for Japan. That was kind of a great thing, right? We agree firstly with local government insofar as the government can actually affect the way people think. We don't think that it's true to say that governments have no effect on people, particularly Japanese countries. Two further responses though. We say that it is firstly a lie that most Japanese people think that the Second World War was great. After the Second World War, Japan widely embraced majority pacifist culture for two reasons. Firstly, within Japanese culture, there is a notion of shame and defeat, right? The reason that Japanese soldiers would commit harakiri is because the idea of shaming yourself in defeat meant that you surrendered something, your pride and your dignity. So culturally, losing the Second World War meant that Japan didn't venerate that war for the most part, but mostly saw it as something shameful and negative. And secondly, we think it was achieved by international coordination of the kind that Germany faced in the aftermath of the Second World War as well. Instead, what we think is that veneration of soldiers is a tool being used by a minority of nationalists to achieve political ends and to drive an aggressive, hegemonic view of nationalism that we think is negative, right? So we break down that, given that that's not true, we think that it's totally consistent, and in fact, Japanese people will react positively to this and use it as an ability to embrace nationalism free of this Second World War aggression. And that's the second thing, so we think it's similar to the association between nationalism and World War II aggression, and we're going to talk about why that's really good in a moment. Now first, let's just quickly look at why North Asia cultural memory of World War II is particularly important at first. China and Nuremberg after World War II were for individual war criminals. Your model leaves the whole country of Japan in an analogously to the Treaty of Versailles after World War I. Okay, so we don't think Nuremberg was like the end game for Germany after the Second World War. We think the end game was when individual soldiers were shamed by their communities, right? When domestically, Germany decided that it would not continue to celebrate soldiers who had participated in the Second World War. When it decided that it was not acceptable to hide behind, I was just giving orders. When culturally and collectively, they accepted responsibility for the actions that are not only undertaken by governments, but by everyone. Right, so we think that in North Asia, it's particularly important important to look at the cultural memory of the Second World War in two main regards. First, with regards to China, secondly, as regards to Japan. In terms of Japan, we think that modern Japanese culture has been incredibly shaped by post-World War II aggression, right? We think that the fact that Japan now embraces pacifism and isn't allowed to have a military, right, is entirely based on the idea that what they did during World War II was horrific and that's societal. They perceive that as being something that is shameful, something that is holistically negative. What we think does happen is that at the moment, particularly very recently with bigger substitutions arriving, they're attempting to use Second World War national, Second World War aggression as part of a nationalist rhetoric that poses a counter-narrative of pacifism. We think that that's really harmful and actually prevents Japan developing a positive sense of nationalism because there's an inherent association between World War II aggression and more positive regional hegemony. For instance, engaging in conversations with countries like South Korea and China. We think that that kind of association means that for moderates, people who aren't incredibly insane nationalists, it's very hard to buy into positive conceptions of Japanese nationalism and regional participation without condemning them as being associated with the Second World War. That's the benefit. And then, as far as China's concerned, we think that as a rising regional power, there's a particular focus on territorial integrity. As you see, for instance, with the WWII Islands conflict, and with, for instance, the conflict over Tibet and Kashmir. I think this is a power that cares incredibly much about the cultural history of the invasion of Manchuria, which is a territorial imprint on their power. I think that while that persists, China is never ever going to engage with Japan, because it's such an egregious assault on what it perceives as a symbol of its regional power and hegemony. We say that because of that, so long as this exists, we're not going to get anywhere with China. And trade talks, conflict resolution, and deals with North Korea, all entirely off the table. That's the link that we're missing there. So why is this sanitized Japanese nationalism? I've already talked about things like the culture of shame that exists in Japan for most people around the veneration of Second World War. The problem is that under the status quo, the government explicitly connects the deaths in the Second World War and the aggression of the Second World War with nationalism. There's a perception that you either have to be a total pacifist and believe in Japanese isolationism, or you have to say that the things that were done during the Second World War weren't actually that bad, and we should venerate and celebrate the people who participated in it and that more aggressive brand of regional history. We think this allows Japan to instead recognise a moderate middle ground, because particularly in politics, people aren't driven to the two parties to stand on either side of that spectrum. They're instead committed to occupy a middle ground, and they might say that Japan should take a more active regional role as a hegemonic power, which would simultaneously condemn actions that were aggressive and cruel and horrific. Speaker, this is not just about moving on to the rest of the world, it's about moving on to Japan. It's something we've seen done very well in Germany. We'd like to see it done in Asia. We're proud.